So I want you to just imagine for a second that you're sitting in a jury box.
Okay, yeah.
You're sitting there, and on one side of the courtroom, you have this defendant. And by all accounts, he's, this honor roll student.
Okay.
A perfect 4.0 GPA.
Right, doing everything right.
Exactly. I mean, he was even recently nominated to be the captain of his high school track team. So just a teenager who, conventionally speaking, is on a really good path.
But then there's the other side of the courtroom.
Right. On the other side, you got the medical examiner up on the stand showing you this horrifying photograph. It's a fatal, incredibly precise knife wound right to the heart of a total stranger.
It's jarring.
It is. And the prosecution is looking right at you, the jury, and telling you that this exact same honor student deliberately drove a blade into another kid's chest. And this wasn't in some dark alley. This was during a crowded, highly supervised school sporting event.
Yeah, that's the thing you really have to wrap your head around.
And your entire job as a juror is to somehow reconcile those two totally contradictory realities. And, in the case we are doing a deep dive into today, a jury had to do exactly that. And they made their decision in under 3 hours.
Which is just wild. I mean, that impossible cognitive dissonance is really at the absolute center of this whole case.
Yeah, totally.
Because we're looking at an event that, honestly, it completely shatters the baseline assumptions you probably have about school safety, about how, teenage conflicts escalate.
And how the justice system measures intent, right?
Exactly. Because when you put a 17-year-old on trial for murder under these very specific circumstances, you are no longer just looking at a criminal act. You're forced to really examine the mechanisms of adolescent psychology and then how those clash with the super rigid boundaries of the law.
It's a really heavy reality, and that's exactly what our mission is today. We're unpacking the case of Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf.
Right.
And to really understand how all this unraveled, we kind of have to go back to the inciting incident.
Yeah.
So this happened on April 2, 2025.
At a secondary school track meet.
In the Dallas area city of Frisco, Texas. And I want to pause on the setting for just a second because it really matters.
Oh, the setting is crucial.
Yeah. If you've ever been to a high school track meet, it's inherently this community space. You have coaches everywhere. You have parents packed into the bleachers. There are referees on the field. It is, by design, a highly structured, heavily supervised environment.
Yeah, the structure is supposedly the safeguard, right?
Right.
But at the same time, that specific environment carries this really intense underlying psychological current. You've got multiple rival schools gathered in one single location.
Like a giant powder keg.
Essentially, yeah. Because from a behavioral standpoint, bringing rival schools together like that automatically establishes an us versus them dynamic.
Right.
And for teenagers, their prefrontal cortexes, which is the part of the brain that handles, long-term consequence evaluation and impulse control.
That's still actively developing, right?
Yeah, very actively developing. So that tribal, competitive environment can act like an absolute pressure cooker. And when you introduce even a minor dispute into that specific pressure cooker, the rational decision-making process can just get completely bypassed.
Which, unfortunately, brings us to the foundational facts of what actually happened between Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf.
Yeah.
So these two 17-year-olds did not even attend the same secondary school.
No connection at all.
None. The prosecutors made it incredibly clear during the trial that they had absolutely no prior connection. There was no long simmering feud, no history of bad blood between their families, not even like mutual friends where a dispute had gotten out of hand.
They were total strangers.
Complete strangers
Oh.
who just happened to cross paths at this athletic event. And I always kind of think of it like it's like a spark hitting dry tinder.
That's a really good way to put it.
Because it's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. You have this completely random encounter between two teenagers with zero history, and it instantly ignites into a fatal situation in a crowded public space.
Yeah, a conflict that ignited entirely in the moment, and rather than being de-escalated by the environment,
Which you should have been, with all those adults around.
right, by the presence of adults or just the public setting itself. Instead of that, the altercation basically bypassed any sort of verbal posturing and just immediately escalated into physical, lethal violence. The track meet became a crime scene.
Because Austin Metcalf was fatally stabbed.
He was, and the specific details of that stabbing became the massive focal point of the prosecution's case over a year later when the trial finally commenced.
Which we need to touch on that timeline because it's really important for you listening to keep in mind. The incident happens in April 2025. Both of these boys are 17.
Right.
And then you flash forward to a recent Tuesday, which is over a year later, when this legal journey finally reaches its climax. Carmelo Anthony is now 19 years old. He's sitting in a courtroom facing literally the rest of his life in prison.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher.
And during that trial, the jury had to listen to the Collin County Chief Medical Examiner. That was Dr. Elizabeth Ventura. And her testimony, I mean, the sources reported it as being deeply emotional, but more importantly, it was clinically devastating for the defense.
It really was, because Dr. Ventura detailed the actual physical reality of the altercation, and that strips away any sort of abstraction about what happened that afternoon.
Right, it's not theoretical anymore.
Exactly. She described this large gaping wound in Austin Metcalf's chest, and she specifically noted that the knife had pierced his heart. And in a courtroom, medical evidence like that serves a very distinct purpose. It's not just about establishing the cause of death.
It's the how, right?
Yes, it establishes the mechanism of the violence. A knife piercing a heart requires a certain trajectory. It requires a significant amount of physical force.
It implies a targeted motion.
Deliberate and targeted, exactly.
And see, that medical description, a deliberate thrust to the heart, that is exactly what makes the defense's job so incredibly difficult here.
Oh, near impossible.
Because they now have to convince a jury that the person who inflicted that really calculated, forceful wound is the exact same person as this 4.0 honor roll track captain.
Right.
How do you even begin to build a narrative that connects those two extremes? I mean, how often do juries have to reconcile that kind of cognitive dissonance?
It's tough. And the defense's strategy, really, it relied heavily on trying to establish a baseline of rationality for him.
Okay, how do they do that?
Well, they called multiple witnesses. This included fellow students and, crucially, the track coach, Adam Linwood.
Oh, right.
Coach Linwood's testimony was super critical because he testified that Anthony was actually nominated for the role of team captain.
Wow.
Yeah. And then on top of that, local NBC News affiliate reports had corroborated that Anthony was this stellar student, near perfect grades, the 4.0 GPA. Basically, the defense is utilizing what psychologists call the halo effect.
The halo effect. I'm going to break down how that actually plays out in a courtroom for you listening. The halo effect is, it's basically this cognitive bias, right? Where our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their specific character traits.
Precisely.
Like, if he gets good grades and leads his teammates, our brains automatically go, oh, he must be a fundamentally good person.
Yes. The defense wasn't arguing that the stabbing didn't happen. They couldn't.
Right, there were too many people there.
Exactly. They're arguing self-defense. So by putting the 4.0 GPA and the captain nomination front and center, they are trying to convince the jury that Carmelo Anthony is a highly rational, future-oriented individual.
So they're saying, look at his track record, pun intended, I guess.
Yeah, the underlying argument is really clear. A kid with this much to lose, a kid who makes, rational choices every single day in the classroom and on the field, he would not just throw his entire life away to stab a stranger over some petty school rivalry. Therefore, their argument goes, if he used lethal force, he must have genuinely, reasonably believed his own life was in imminent, terrifying danger.
Okay, but how do you weigh a student's prior character against the actions of just one single chaotic afternoon? Because the prosecution obviously didn't just sit back and let the halo effect take over.
Oh, absolutely not. The prosecution brought in a completely different set of witnesses to basically shatter that halo.
Who did they call?
They called students who were actually at the track meet eyewitnesses to the altercation itself. And these testimonies universally described Anthony not as some scared kid defending himself,
But as the aggressor.
the clear aggressor. The state argued that Anthony actively threatened Metcalf before intentionally killing him.
Wow. So it comes down to intent versus reaction, right?
That's the core legal distinction here. Self-defense requires proportionality.
Meaning, if someone punches you, you can't just shoot them.
Exactly. If you are threatened with lethal force, you can respond with lethal force. But the prosecution used their eyewitnesses to construct this sort of micro-timeline of those fatal minutes.
To show who escalated it.
Right. They aimed to prove that Anthony introduced the legal element, the knife, into a situation that simply did not warrant it, and that he did so with aggressive intent.
So you really have two different types of truth being presented. Character witnesses tell a jury who a person was for the past 17 years. but eyewitnesses tell a jury who that person was in the specific 17 seconds that actually matter to the law.
That is a perfect way to summarize it. And speaking of the law, we really need to pivot to the legal framework of this trial itself and the specific charges that were on the table.
Yeah, let's talk about the law, because how the justice system treats a 17-year-old is a massive factor in this case. Carmelo was 17 when this happened on April 2, 2025. And in a lot of jurisdictions, right, that means juvenile court.
Yes, in many places it does.
Which means a completely different set of rehabilitative goals. Different sentencing structures. Usually there's a seal on the public record. But this happened in Texas.
Yeah, and the mechanism of Texas law regarding age and criminal responsibility is something a lot of people misunderstand until they are suddenly caught in it.
Wait, so how does it actually work there?
Well, in Texas, the age of criminal responsibility begins at 17.
At 17, not 18.
Right. And this is in a situation where a judge holds a special transfer hearing to decide if, like, a particularly heinous crime warrants moving a minor up to adult court.
Ah, so it's not discretionary.
No. In Texas, for criminal justice purposes, a 17-year-old automatically enters the system as an adult.
Wow.
Carmelo Anthony was legally an adult the second the police arrived at that track meet.
So he is facing full-on adult murder charges. But looking at our sources, there was one ultimate punishment that was off the table, despite him being tried in adult court.
Right. The death penalty was completely off the table.
Even though Texas treats him as an adult.
Yes. Because while state law treats 17-year-olds as adults, federal constitutional law supersedes it in this very specific area.
Oh, okay.
There was a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Roper v. Simmons, and it ruled that executing someone for a crime they committed while under the age of 18 violates the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment.
Because of the brain development stuff we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. The court officially recognized that adolescent brains are fundamentally different from adult brains, specifically when it comes to impulse control and, susceptibility to peer pressure. So because of that, they cannot be held to the ultimate level of culpability that the death penalty requires.
It's a really fascinating legal boundary, if you think about it. The state is essentially saying you are adult enough to spend the next 4 decades in a maximum security prison. But the federal government says your brain is still too juvenile to qualify for execution.
It's a very stark line.
So he's facing standard adult murder charges. But during the trial, Judge Roach actually gave the jury another option, right?
Yeah, he did. Aside from, a full self-defense acquittal or a guilty verdict for murder, the judge allowed the jury to consider manslaughter charges.
And how does that change things for the jury?
Including manslaughter alters the entire dynamic of a jury deliberation. It provides them with a legal off-ramp.
What does manslaughter actually mean in this context?
Manslaughter, by definition, implies recklessness. It means you acted in a way that caused a death and you consciously disregarded a substantial and unjustifiable risk. But, and this is the key part, you did not possess the specific, premeditated intent to kill that a murder conviction requires.
Okay, and if they had chosen manslaughter, what would the sentence have been?
It would have carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison.
Okay, which brings us to the outcome. And honestly, this is where I really struggled to wrap my head around the timeline of this justice system.
The speed of it.
Yes, because you have this incredibly complex trial. You have a 17-year-old defendant with a pristine academic record. You have a formal claim of self-defense. You have the judge specifically instructing the jury that they can consider this lesser charge of manslaughter. The prosecution calls, nearly 24 witnesses?
Yeah, eyewitnesses, yeah, over the course of the trial.
Right, over several days. And yet, the Texas jury took less than 3 hours on a Tuesday to return a verdict. They completely rejected the self-defense and manslaughter arguments, guilty of murder. 35-year sentence.
Less than 3 hours to navigate all of those conflicting narratives and complex legal definitions.
Wait, I genuinely struggle with this.
Yeah.
Less than 3 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, in a major felony trial, it takes 3 hours just for 12 strangers to get into a room, elect a foreperson, figure out how they're going to order lunch, and read through the judge's instructions.
That's usually the case, yes.
Even if the physical evidence is bad, they had dozens of witness testimonies to review. Doesn't a deliberation that incredibly fast suggest the jury found the medical examiner's physical evidence and the prosecution's eyewitnesses just overwhelmingly conclusive, like to the point of completely overriding the character testimonies from the moment the courtroom doors closed?
Your assessment is entirely justified. because a 3-hour deliberation in a murder trial is exceptionally rapid.
It's unheard of.
And when a jury moves that fast, it reveals the mechanics of how they weigh the evidence. It tells us that the physical evidence, the actual mechanism of the crime, legally nullified everything else in their minds.
But how does physical evidence nullify a legal argument like manslaughter?
It comes right back to Dr. Ventura's testimony, the knife piercing the heart.
The intent behind the thrust.
Exactly. Because manslaughter requires the jury to believe the act was reckless, like maybe he was swinging a knife blindly in a panic, but a direct, forceful plunge into a vital organ like the heart, that implies targeting.
Which implies intent.
Yes. Once the jury views the physical wound as intentional, manslaughter is instantly off the table. Furthermore, if they believe the prosecution's eyewitnesses who testified that Anthony was the aggressor, making active threats,
Then self-defense is also instantly off the table.
precisely. In the jury's eyes, the 4.0 GPA just didn't matter. Because a 4.0 student is just as capable of forming lethal intent as anyone else, they didn't need days to debate his character. They only needed hours to confirm his actions.
Wow. So they returned a guilty verdict for murder, resulting in a 35-year sentence. But it's crazy because that rapid, decisive closure inside the courtroom, it's creating the exact opposite effect outside of it.
Oh, completely.
The jury resolved this in like 180 minutes, but the community has been processing this, fracturing over it, for more than a year. And the verdict has only intensified that polarization.
Yeah, the speed of the justice system rarely aligns with the speed of community healing.
That is so true.
And this trial really became a national flashpoint. It drew intense scrutiny, not just on the facts of the case, but on the mechanics of the trial itself. It sparked these intense debates about self-defense laws, about school safety, and significantly, it became racially polarizing.
Right. And looking at the sources provided for this deep dive, there was a public statement following the verdict from the civil rights organization Next Generation Action Network. They advocated for Anthony.
They did.
And before we get into what they said, I just want to pause and make something super clear to you listening. When we cover sources that contain politically or socially charged content, we are never taking any sides.
Right, exactly.
We are just impartially reporting on the content provided. We aren't endorsing the viewpoints of these organizations. We're simply trying to convey the ideas contained in the original source material because they are a major part of the aftermath of this case.
That's a really important distinction to make. So what the Next Generation Action Network publicly pointed out was a critical demographic fact about the trial. There was not a single black juror on the panel that convicted him.
And when an advocacy group highlights the racial makeup of a jury in a highly publicized, deeply tragic trial like this one, it fundamentally affects how a large portion of the public perceives the fairness of the outcome.
It changes the entire conversation.
Yeah, we aren't just talking about the guilt or innocence of Carmelo Anthony anymore. We are talking about the perceived legitimacy of the system that sentenced him.
Because it introduces this complex mechanism of jury selection, which is known as voir dire, right into the public discourse.
Right.
When a community looks at a jury and sees that it doesn't reflect its own demographics or the demographics of the defendant, it breeds immediate distrust. For a portion of the public, a 35-year sentence handed down by a jury completely lacking. Black representation doesn't look like swift justice. It looks like a systemic failure. The focus shifts from the tragedy at the track meet to broader historical anxieties about race and the American legal system.
And all of that national scrutiny, all of that social and racial polarization, it lands squarely on the shoulders of the local Frisco community.
They're the ones left dealing with the fallout.
Exactly. I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of a Frisco parent or student right now, you are navigating an absolute minefield of grief. The Frisco School District actually had to release a statement after the verdict, and you can practically hear the tightrope they're trying to walk in their wording.
School districts in these situations are just in an impossible position. They have to acknowledge a horrific loss of life, but they have to do it without alienating the different factions of their own community who might feel very, very differently about the verdict itself.
Right, so the district released this statement acknowledging that the community has, quote, carried the weight of this tragedy for more than a year.
A long time to carry that.
Yeah. They emphasize their respect for the judicial process, which, is the standard institutional line. But they also openly acknowledge the strong emotions and the really deep grief that the trial brought back to the surface for everyone.
Which is very real.
And they ended it by asking the community to support one another with, quote, respect, sensitivity, and understanding.
It's a necessary plea. But it highlights the harsh reality that a guilty verdict does not magically repair a shattered community.
No, it doesn't.
For the family of Austin Metcalf, a 35-year sentence might be the closest thing to justice the law can possibly provide. But for others in that same community, the outcome is seen as the tragic loss of a second young life. A brilliant student swallowed up by the prison system.
Yeah.
And the students walking the halls of those secondary schools, they are left to process both of those realities simultaneously.
I want you, listening to this, to think about this almost as a thought experiment regarding the implicit contracts we make every single day.
Okay.
Like, if you were a parent sending your kid to a supervised school event, or if you were a student attending one, your implicit contract with the school is safety.
You assume you'll be fine.
Right. You assume that the structure, the referees, the coaches, the rules will protect you from chaos. But this case doesn't just break the rules, it shatters that contract entirely.
It does.
How do you go back and sit on those bleachers the next spring without looking over your shoulder? Because it destroys the illusion that doing all the right things, getting good grades, joining sports, attending supervised events, somehow insulates you from random catastrophic violence.
It exposes the sheer fragility of our social infrastructure. We build these environments assuming that everyone will just adhere to the social contract, but when an honor roll student and a complete stranger cross paths, and within minutes the situation bypasses all social guardrails and ends with a knife to the heart, it proves that the structure is really only as strong as the impulse control of the individuals within it.
That's a really chilling point. We've unpacked an incredibly dense and tragic series of events today. We looked at the fatal intersection of two 17-year-olds with no prior connection at a Frisco track meet.
Yeah.
We explored that jarring contrast between a student's stellar academic record and the prosecution's evidence of aggressive intent.
The halo effect versus reality.
Exactly. We broke down the mechanics of Texas law treating teenagers as adults, and how the physical reality of a heart wound allowed a very fast jury to bypass manslaughter and deliver a 35-year murder sentence in under 3 hours.
A lot to process.
And finally, we looked at how the lack of representation on that jury, combined with just the sheer horror of the event, has left a local community deeply fractured.
And as we step back from the specifics of this trial, it really leaves us with a provocative reality to consider about the limits of prevention.
What do you mean?
Well, we pour immense resources into school safety protocols, right? Metal detectors, conflict resolution programs. We rely heavily on the threat of the justice system to deter violence. But when a split-second altercation between two complete strangers at an everyday sporting event bypasses the rational brain entirely and ends in a fatal tragedy, it forces us to ask a really difficult question.
Are there any real structural guardrails that can actually prevent the sudden, catastrophic escalation of teenage conflict? Or despite all our laws and our supervised spaces, are we ultimately just relying on the fragile hope that everyday disputes don't turn fatal?
That is the uncomfortable question lingering over this entire case.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on today's deep dive and for wrestling with these incredibly difficult complexities alongside us. Keep exploring, keep questioning the systems